There's this very specific type of exhaustion that happens when you finally achieve exactly what you thought you wanted.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, like you get the promotion, or you hit that savings goal, or, I don't know, you buy the house, and you expect this profound sense of relief to wash over you.
But instead, you just get hit with this wave of dread.
Yes. Within days, just overwhelming dread. Because the moment you cross the finish line, it feels like society just moves the goalpost 10 miles further down the road.
Yeah, it is arguably the defining psychological paradox of our time. I mean, we have literally never had more access to wealth or status or connectivity, and yet the baseline level of human burnout is just staggering.
Which is exactly what we are tackling in today's deep dive.
Mm.
We're looking at a really fascinating stack of sources today, everything from sociological frameworks and historical analyses of human ambition, all the way to the legendary Harvard Grant study.
Right, because we want to look at the actual data behind why modern life feels like a pressure cooker.
Yes, exactly. The mission here isn't just to, admire the problem. We want to decode these invisible societal pressures that are actively pushing our nervous systems to the brink. And, more importantly, extract a practical toolkit for you to maintain your mental health and self-awareness in a world that just constantly demands more.
And doing that requires looking under the hood of human motivation. Because the reason so many people feel trapped right now isn't, it's not a lack of time management. It's not a failure of willpower.
Right.
It's that we are operating under this inherited, largely invisible definition of what a good life actually is. And if you don't understand where that definition came from, you really can't free yourself from it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the idea of success seems so static, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just a universal truth. But the historical data we're looking at shows that it is actually a highly volatile concept. The goalposts haven't just moved. The entire game has been redesigned several times.
That's spot on. If you look at early human history, success was purely biological. In the ancient era, it was literally just about avoiding predators and securing enough calories to survive the winter.
If you woke up breathing, you were crushing it.
Exactly. But then, as we established civilizations, survival became less of a daily, acute crisis. So the metric shifted inward. During the classical era, success was defined almost entirely by virtue, by your character.
Right, the sources dive into that Greek concept, eudaimonia, which usually just gets mistranslated as happiness, but it actually means something closer to human flourishing, right?
Yeah.
Fulfilling your highest potential.
Yeah, it had absolutely nothing to do with how many chariots you owned, and we see a parallel to that in the ancient Indian framework of the Purusharthas.
Oh, right, the four elements.
Yes. Success there was defined by a really strict balance of your moral duty, your economic prosperity, human desires, and spiritual liberation. If you amassed immense wealth but neglected your family or your ethics, society didn't view you as successful. They viewed you as profoundly unbalanced.
Wow. But then the Industrial Revolution happens.
Right.
And suddenly we have factories and ledgers and GDP. And the entire concept of a well-lived life gets dragged out of that internal moral realm and gets bolted onto external production.
It became quantifiable. Everything had to be measured, and that quantifiable metric mutated again in the digital era. So today, success isn't just about what you produce or what you own. It's about visibility.
Visibility, like how many followers you can leverage.
Exactly. How highly curated your lifestyle appears to a global audience. It's about how much sheer attention you can command.
Which perfectly explains why we're all so exhausted. I mean, we are literally trying to chase an infinite metric. Are we essentially trying to run 21st century digital software on ancient biological hardware and just getting stressed because society keeps handing us the wrong instruction manual?
That is a perfect way to phrase it. And this mismatch triggers something the psychologists in our research call the arrival fallacy.
Coined by Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar.
Yes, exactly. It's that illusion you mentioned at the start. The stubborn belief that reaching a specific destination will finally bring lasting happiness. And the reason the arrival fallacy is so punishing isn't just philosophical, it's neurological.
The dopamine drop.
Right. When you are striving for a goal, your brain is pumping out dopamine. It's the molecule of anticipation and motivation. But the moment you achieve the goal,
The dopamine just vanishes.
it drops right off. Your brain's reward center recalibrates to a new baseline. So, that feeling of emptiness you get after a huge achievement, it isn't a sign that you chose the wrong goal. It is the literal neurochemical reality of your brain adjusting.
So society tells us to chase these visible milestones. Our biology chemically punishes us when we actually hit them, and then society says, well, the only cure is to chase a bigger milestone.
It's a closed-loop system of misery.
It really is. And you can see the breaking point in the modern workplace data we reviewed. Like, on one extreme, you have the 996 work culture.
Right, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week.
Yeah, where extreme exhaustion is treated as this ultimate badge of honor.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, we're seeing these massive counter-movements led by stressed youth.
Yes, particularly starting in Asia, but definitely spreading globally.
Right, things like Tang Peng, which means laying flat or, maintaining low desires. And Bai Lan, which translates to letting it rot, which sounds intense, but it's basically a form of active resignation from the rat race. And to be clear, we aren't here to take any kind of political or moral stance on these movements. We're just reporting what the sources show.
Right, we're looking at this purely from a psychological standpoint. And from that lens, laying flat looks a lot less like laziness and more like a collective nervous system just pulling the emergency brake.
Yeah.
If you connect this to the bigger picture, it is a highly logical protective mechanism. When an environment demands infinite growth from finite human biology, shutting down is really the only way the organism can protect itself.
It's like we're trying to play this massive multiplayer game where the rules change every time you level up and the developers secretly deleted the win condition. Like, of course, players are just putting the controller down.
Totally.
But this raises a huge question for me. If the game is rigged and it's making us miserable, why don't more of us just put the controller down? Why is it so incredibly hard to just walk away from societal expectations?
To understand that, we really have to look at the invisible architecture of human hierarchy. The sources rely heavily on the work of French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu.
Okay.
He developed this concept called social capital. Now, in a modern corporate sense...
Yeah, people use social capital to just mean networking, right? Like having a big LinkedIn following or knowing the right people.
Right, but Bourdieu's definition is way more intense than that. For him, social capital is essentially a hidden currency of power and status that you derive from your position in society. It dictates who gets listened to, who gets respected, and who gets resources. And here is the trap. Bourdieu argued that we internalize the rules for acquiring this capital so deeply we don't even realize we're competing for it. We just instinctively feel that acquiring more status equals biological safety.
Right, because we crave the approval of the tribe.
Yeah.
Because historically, getting kicked out of the tribe meant you starved to death. So it's not just, peer pressure. It's a literal evolutionary survival mechanism that's being hijacked by modern consumerism.
Exactly. And this hijacking is perfectly explained by self-determination theory, or SDT.
From D.C. and Ryan.
Yes, Edward D.C. and Richard Ryan. It's a huge cornerstone of modern psychology. SDT proves that human beings have 3 basic fundamental psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Okay, let me make sure I have this right. Autonomy is the feeling that you are the author of your own life. Competence means you feel capable of overcoming challenges. And relatedness means you feel genuinely connected to other humans.
You got it. When those 3 are met, you operate on intrinsic motivation. You do things because they actually align with your core self. But when society leverages social capital against us, it forces us into a very dark psychological corner called introjected regulation.
Okay, wait, let me wrap my head around this. Introjected regulation is a form of extrinsic motivation, right? But it's not like someone is holding a gun to your head. It's more like the pressure's coming from inside the house.
That's a great way to put it. Introjected regulation is when you act out of guilt, anxiety, or this desperate need to protect your ego. You are doing the task, working the 80-hour week, buying the luxury car, and it feels like your own choice. But the motivation is entirely controlled by an internalized phantom audience.
So what does this all mean? Is introjected regulation basically like wearing a highly expensive tailored suit that looks amazing to everyone else, but it's actually 2 sizes too small and it's slowly suffocating you?
What's fascinating here is how accurate that biological metaphor really is. Because the parasite entirely consumes your autonomy. You are no longer navigating your own life. You are just managing the anxiety of how others perceive your life.
And that has to be exhausting.
It is. Chronic introjected regulation is actually one of the most reliable predictors of clinical burnout and depression.
Okay, but I have to push back a little bit here. We can talk about psychological autonomy and, avoiding the status game all day long, but my landlord does not accept eudaimonia for rent.
Right, of course.
We live in a highly material world. So are the sources suggesting that wanting money is inherently toxic to our mental health?
No, and this is where the research gets incredibly nuanced. It is not some simplistic money is the root of all evil argument. We have to look at the dual model of materialism, which was developed by researcher Jenny Jiao and her colleagues.
Okay.
They discovered that materialism actually fractures into two very distinct psychological mechanisms. The first one is happiness materialism.
Right, which is the belief that wealth and consumption are the literal engines of a happy life. And if you hold this belief, the psychological data is pretty brutal. It basically leads straight to misery.
Because it places your baseline for happiness completely outside of your control. If happiness is a product you buy, your brain is just trapped on a hedonic treadmill. You are constantly comparing your standard of living to the people above you, which breeds resentment and degrades your actual relationship.
Which immediately brings to mind that famous quote from Fight Club in the research. We buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like.
Yes.
That is happiness materialism in a nutshell. It's a neurochemical trap.
Yeah.
But Zhao's team also identified success materialism. And this one really surprised me.
It surprises a lot of people. Success materialism is the belief that wealth is simply a milestone. It's a metric of achievement, not the source of joy itself. And the data shows that people who view wealth this way actually experience a boost in economic motivation and higher overall life satisfaction.
Because they treat money like a scoreboard, not the game itself.
Yeah.
It's just a tool.
Exactly.
And this aligns perfectly with the hard scientific reality of income and happiness that we looked at. Does money buy happiness? Yes, absolutely, up to a very specific threshold.
Right, because money eliminates the chronic physiological stress of poverty. If you can't afford groceries, your nervous system is in constant crisis.
But the critical insight from the sources is the plateau. Once you hit around $80,000 a year, adjusting slightly for cost of living, of course, the emotional returns begin to diminish really sharply, and by the time you reach $200,000 a year, the emotional benefit of each additional dollar hits absolute zero.
Zero. Meaning a billionaire is not extracting any more psychological joy from their wealth than someone comfortably making a mid-six-figure salary.
Wow. Money is an incredibly effective tool for establishing biological security. But it's a terrible architect for building a fulfilling life. So, we've identified the historical trap, we understand how introjected regulation hijacks our autonomy, and we've decoded the money paradox. Which brings us to the ultimate mission of this deep dive. How do you actually shield your self-awareness and mental health from all of this? Let's build a toolkit based on the sources.
It really starts by aggressively confronting that infinite metric we discussed earlier. The most potent defense mechanism you can build is a deeply personal, mathematically clear definition of enough.
But wait, in a culture completely obsessed with optimization and growth, doesn't defining enough just feel like giving up? Isn't that just settling?
It's the exact opposite of settling. Defining enough is the ultimate assertion of autonomy. If you don't dictate what sufficiency looks like in your career, your finances, and your social life, the societal default is simply more. And more has no finish line.
Right.
Defining enough allows you to actually win the game and exit the field.
Which requires actively redefining success on your own terms. I absolutely love how the author Maya Angelou framed this. She said, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it.
It's so powerful.
Notice there is zero mention of scale or wealth or audience there. It is 100% internal.
Because it maps perfectly onto that core psychological need for autonomy. Another really powerful mechanism for this comes from Stephen Covey, author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, the funeral test.
Yes.
Yes.
You vividly imagine your own funeral. What do you genuinely want people to say about your life? The gap between the status you are currently exhausting yourself to achieve and the legacy you actually want to leave behind it immediately exposes your true values.
That is a brutal but completely necessary reality check. But knowing your values is only half the battle, right? The clinical resources we reviewed highlight that to protect those values, you have to kind of weaponize your boundaries.
Yeah.
Especially if you struggle with perfectionism.
Definitely. Perfectionism is often just introjected regulation in disguise. It's just the fear of losing social capital.
Right.
To combat it, you need actionable scripts. The psychology literature emphasizes the power of polite, impenetrable boundaries. Simply saying, I appreciate your input, but I need to make this decision for myself, is a radical act of reclaiming your psychological space.
And when you inevitably fail to meet some insane standard because, you're human, you have to deploy self-compassion. Not as some fluffy wellness concept, but as a clinical tool to regulate your nervous system.
Right.
You have to speak to yourself with the exact same grace you would offer a friend whose startup just failed or who didn't get a promotion. You wouldn't call them a worthless failure.
And this naturally transitions into the most critical element of the entire framework. If you want to survive the modern pressure cooker, you cannot do it in isolation.
Yeah.
This is the central finding of the Harvard Grant study.
Which is one of the longest running psychological studies in history, right?
Yes. They tracked a cohort of men for over 80 years to determine the true predictors of a long, fulfilling life.
And it wasn't their cholesterol levels, it wasn't their IQ, and it wasn't their social class.
No, it was the quality of their close relationships. The individuals who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. Deep, vital social connection actually buffers our brains against physical and emotional decline.
Which brings us to this brilliant concept from moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt. He uses the metaphor of the rider and the elephant to explain the human mind. The rider represents our conscious, rational thought, and the elephant represents our massive, ancient emotional drives and automatic desires.
And the fundamental flaw in modern self-help is the belief that the rider is in total control. We think we can just logic our way out of burnout. We think we can just rationally decide to stop caring about status.
But the elephant weighs 6 tons. If the emotional elephant decides it desperately wants the approval of the tribe, the rational rider is just getting dragged through the mud. You literally cannot outthink an evolutionary drive.
Exactly. You cannot willpower your way to mental health. You have to train the elephant. And the research suggests you do that by changing the elephant's herd. You have to immerse yourself in a community, even a really small one, that shares your redefined values. When your close relationships value eudaimonia over visibility, your elephant naturally calms down and follows suit.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We started this whole deep dive by looking at extreme corporate work cultures, billionaires, and the historical evolution of human dominance. But the ultimate, peer-reviewed, statistically proven hack for surviving modern life, it is remarkably quiet.
It really is.
It's defining enough, being fiercely compassionate to yourself when you stumble, and investing deeply in a few people who know the real you.
We have engineered a society that profits from making the human experience incredibly complicated. The ultimate rebellion is insisting on simplicity.
So to pull all these threads together for you, we are swimming in an outdated, mutated definition of success that demands infinite visibility. We are unconsciously chasing social capital and letting interjected regulation turn us into our own worst taskmasters. We get confused by the money paradox, mistaking a useful tool for a source of identity.
But the antidote is within our control. It lies in reclaiming our autonomy, drawing rigid boundaries around our energy, and leaning heavily into the vital relationships that actually regulate our nervous systems.
Redefining success is not just a weekend workshop. It is a daily, deliberate practice of self-awareness. It's waking up and consciously choosing not to step back onto a treadmill that someone else programmed.
Which raises an important question, I think. Something that challenges the very core of why we strive in the first place.
Yes, and we wanted to leave you with this final provocative thought to test your own internal motivations. Imagine that tomorrow you are absolutely guaranteed to achieve your biggest, most wildly ambitious goal. But there's a catch. You are permanently forbidden from ever telling another human being that you achieved it. You could never post about it, no one will ever congratulate you, and your social status will not change one bit. Would you still want it? Or does the value of that dream lie entirely in the applause? Something to think about.